Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first of today's webinar covering the basics of IT. So just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to my intrepid team that have decided to accept the challenge of explaining IT without jargon. Just some introductions and to remind you as well, this session is being recorded, so and it will be available later today and uploaded onto the Risk Evolves YouTube channel with a link through the website as well. If you have any questions, for those of you that never used GoToWebinar before, we can ask questions in the panel, the pop-out box, which should be on your screen. Just type them in there, and the tougher the question for the panel, the better, because I really want to set them a bit of a challenge here. Feel free as well to put any comments into the chat box, and we'll either get them played out, I can either repeat them, or because we've got a relatively small number of people on the call as well, if you want to, we can unmute you and let you ask the panel the questions directly. So we've got a little bit of an additional challenge for the team here today, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves to you separately. We at Risk Evolves, we're firm supporters of the Molly Ollie's charity as well, and I've given the team the challenge of trying to explain the basics of IT without using any jargon. We have a virtual pot of money, and if they use any jargon, I take money out of the pot, and whatever's left in the pot at the end of the session will double and give the money to Molly Ollie's charity. I'm really keen that we don't get to the bottom of the pot and find 2 buttons and a couple of sweet wrappers. So the challenge is on them to make sure that we can get the message across on why IT is so important. And just a little bit of background to the session as well. We know when we work with clients that quite frequently they get stuck on just understanding what some of the principles of IT are. This isn't about being patronising or derogatory to anybody on the call. The world of IT is just full of jargon, it's full of acronyms, it's a completely different language. So the challenge is to explain, and by understanding some of the basics, it means that we can ask the better questions for either our providers or our internal teams who support the IT. So without further ado, Caro, just over to you to make an introduction. You're one of our guest speakers today. Welcome along to the Risk Evolves team.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody else. Thank you for having me along. My name is Caro. I am Bridge Consulting, and I provide IT consultancy and part-time or virtual IT director as a service to businesses, to smaller businesses that don't have any IT leadership in-house, to basically do more of this that Helen's talking about now, to help people understand what good IT is and take ownership of it for them to make it work.
That was good. That was all done without jargon. And if anybody in the chat hears something they don't understand, anybody that's listening, please call out the guys and we'll get them to go back and correct whatever they're saying, or be a little bit more descriptive in what they're saying. Mandy, you're a great friend and great supporter of the Risk Evolves team. Hand over to you.
Hi, I'm Mandy. I work with Helen and the team delivering Cyber Essentials, which is a standard for businesses to prove that they take good care of their IT. What I find most important is that if you ever come across a term that you don't recognise, or someone's trying to talk jargon to you, the earlier you correct and jump in and say, stop, tell me what that means, the better it is. As soon as you've ridden over the first one and not questioned it, you're then wondering what that term is, and then you've lost the whole thing, because you're then in a situation where you've got more and more jargon coming at you. So challenge early and challenge hard.
Absolutely. Barry.
Hi, good morning. My name is Barry Graham. I'm part of the Risk Evolves team. I've joined as a consultant to look at computer systems and the governance and management of computer systems, of which IT is a part. So my role in Risk Evolves is a bit of this, education, training and awareness, but also to make sure that things which are in place, what common security practices exist, and we assess that against either a framework of standards which exist, or against what we know to be best practice in terms of building a security picture. And I go and advise and implement an audit as needed. And hopefully there's no jargon in there.
That was brilliant, because I could see you thinking how you're going to explain some of what we do without using letters like GRC and ISO and all sorts of things. So well done. First challenge overcome. A little bit about Risk Evolves in terms of who we are, what we do, just to expand on Barry's comment there. We love everything about risk, and we love everything about compliance. So in summary, we cover data privacy, information security, environmental, and that's broader now as well in terms of the ESG, the environmental, social and governance. There's a session on that later. ISO certifications, Barry's going to be delivering a session later on ISO 27001, big changes coming along. But again, there's a little bit of jargon, apologies, and finally health and safety as well. So we, or rather Dean, produced this diagram. Take us through it. Who wants to start off with just explaining some of the fundamental principles of IT? In fact, Karen, as you're our guest, let's throw you in straight away. Can you explain parts of this and where we should really start thinking about how our IT works and some of the fundamental principles and keeping it safe as well?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing that I always look at when I'm working with an organisation is what you actually need in place, what the business processes are that need technology to support them. And over the last couple of years, more than ever, sorry, there's a very noisy vehicle outside, more than ever, with home working, users having to need to access business applications at home because they couldn't physically go into the office. This diagram here is a really good explanation of how everything connects together. So if you're looking at the pink box, that's like your office environment, your castle, that you're protected, and you can almost imagine, if you imagine your office environment being a castle and the internet being the road that runs past your castle, you need the road to come into your castle in order for traffic to come in and out. So what you would put in place is maybe a bridge, which was like the router, which is the end of the internet connection into your castle. And then you need to protect it so things can't just come in and out when you don't want them to. And that's where the firewall comes in. So the firewall is almost like a portcullis. So you can punch holes in your firewall in rules to say, I want this traffic to come in and out, and this other traffic I don't want to come in and out. So that's how I keep everything protected. And then on top of that, I'm going to use a jargon word and explain it. So in order to protect your castle, your office environment from all of that, you have your firewall, but then you also have something called a virtual private network, which is a VPN. And that is how you create a secure tunnel of connectivity between your home users and the applications in your office environment. So when someone's working from home, they can connect onto your VPN and then access your office network as if they were in it. So that's how you can allow people to access securely all of the business systems that still live within your office environment. Now then you will also have office applications, business applications that sit outside of your office environment, physically sit outside. So there's been a massive move over the last couple of years and probably driven further by the pandemic, moving from email being on a server in your building to email being hosted in the cloud by Microsoft, and that's called Office 365. Google has one called Gmail. And those are very predominant in the business world now, that people have email external to their business. So it's not sat within that little pink box, it's sat outside. So again, you need to think about how that's kept secure, so any old Joe can't get in and get access to your email. And
if I may, Carol, you've just mentioned VPN there. It'd be useful because it's not on the diagram. So just to highlight where VPN would sit. You used it, so I'm going to assume it's jargon free. Helen, don't judge me too harshly.
Go for it.
If you were going to put VPN onto that diagram, where would you put that, just to show people where VPN would sit and what the responsibility
is?
So
if you imagine a line from one of those home users all the way to the pink box, it's creating a new arrow essentially that goes from the home user through the internet onto the other arrow going into the office, and it would stop at the firewall. It's normally controlled by the firewall, and you can also use this technology to connect two offices together, which would be controlled by the two firewalls talking to each other and creating that same tunnel.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just because it wasn't on there, I just thought it'd be useful to.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you, Barry. Okay, so as well as email being often outside of that in what's called the cloud, and again, let's cut the jargon here. What is the cloud? The cloud is,
I was going to ask you that.
the cloud is just, it's not magic, just like any other application, it's stuff that sits on a server somewhere. It's just that in historical models, that server would either sit in your office or sit in the office of the company that managed computing for you. In the cloud environment, it's just managed by somebody else and delivered in such a way that you access it through the service that they offer, and it's usually paid for on a per use type basis. So historically, if you had email that you had sitting on a server in your building, you would pay for it on an annual basis as a license. You would license however many people, and you would just pay for that as a service internally. What you do now, although this is probably a bad example because Microsoft are just in the process of changing how they license, but most cloud applications now are licensed on a per use, per month type basis.
Is it worth just naming some of those cloud applications that people might recognise and not realise actually that they are cloud applications?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So Microsoft is one, email, Gmail, and Gmail Workspace is another. Then you have things like CRM tools like Salesforce, HubSpot, trying to think of some others.
Accounting packages, so Xero,
yeah.
Sage, QuickBooks are typically cloud-based. We might have some out there in terms of publishing materials, I guess. That's where we see a lot of software at the moment, isn't it? It's all just sitting in the cloud, and we buy it as software as a service. We're buying it as a service. We're having a little nibble at something. They have a license. We usually got a user ID and passwords, and we will come on to user ID and passwords a little bit because I know this is something that Barry's really passionate about as well. But we don't physically own it, do we? We're just using it as a service.
Absolutely. And the great thing about that, and again, I'll slightly caveat this with Microsoft are doing what Microsoft do and slightly changing this, but the great thing about software as a service and buying it as a service on a pay-per-use basis is if you've got 20 people in the office, you pay for 20 licenses. If one leaves, you can just pay for 19, or if someone else comes, then you can pay for 20 again. So it's really kind of helping you to manage budget as well. Although Microsoft are being a bit Microsoft, and they're in the process of moving that back to annual models. We don't like.
Can I also put another advantage in there, Carol, is that even if you're one or two people, you can still use the same technology and have all the same benefits that a big organisation would have, and you can appear to be bigger because all of your systems are running on exactly the same framework as the bigger operators.
Absolutely. And also the other thing that I used to see a lot of that cloud services have really got away from is it's very difficult to, particularly when you're a small business, to try and, well, difficult for any business actually, to manage upgrades of software, and trying to go through a process when you're busy of planning an upgrade and then the testing of that upgrade to make sure everything's good and working before you release it into your environment was very difficult. With cloud services, they just do that and they just tell you when the new version is coming. So it kind of forces that situation a bit more. So again, it keeps you current, it keeps you up to date, which is a benefit. The one thing that I was just going to touch on with cloud services, though, is obviously security when it comes outside of that protected box becomes more of a challenge. And I'm going to mention another jargon word now and explain it. So one of the things that has come along to help protect your cloud services more than just having a standard username and password is what's called multi-factor authentication. And you will hear about that as being called MFA. You will hear of it as 2FA. You might even hear of it as 3FA, although it's not that common, but it is out there. They all mean the same thing, and what they mean is instead of just having my username and password to log on to something, I have an extra level of authentication, which is checking that I am who I say I am, before you get access to your service. So for example, with Microsoft and Gmail, what they do, you get presented when you go onto your login, you get presented with the normal login box to enter your email address and password, and then it takes you to a second level of authentication, which can be done in a number of ways. The simplest is it sends you a text message to your phone, then you have to type the key in that has arrived in that text message, and that's your second layer. Now, I will just mention something here. that's quite important. If there's any Mac users out there, Mac users tend to have iPhone as a phone. I'm one of them. But you just as a flag, if you are using two-factor authentication and you're a Mac user, you should not use text message as the second form of authentication. You should use a third-party application. There is lots of them out there. The main one that I use is called Authenticator. And what that does basically, at the point where you enter your username and password, instead of being sent a text message, you go onto the Authenticator app and you look for the service that you're connecting to, and it will give you a code there instead. Now, the reason for this is because Apple, love them, not everyone does, but they join everything together. So in a situation where you are a Mac user and you have an iPhone, your text messages appear on your device. So if, like me, you store some of your passwords in your browser, and imagine somebody has stolen your device, and they go onto your browser and they go to Office 365 and, oh, look, I can get straight into this because it's remembered the username and password. But then it's asking for two-factor authentication. So then it's asking me to get sent a text message. So I say yes to that, and then lo and behold, the message appears on my Mac and I can just type that in. So it's just a warning really for any Mac users out there. You really need to think about something else as your second factor rather than text message. But lots of things are doing it these days. Banks are doing it as well, or certainly some banks are doing this for transactions. Some organisations, and again, it's mainly around banking that I've seen it, but where an extra layer of authentication is required, they will use three-factor authentication. And that would tend to be, so there's, something which is your password, something you have, which is your, the authentication message that you've just received, and maybe something I am, which might be a fingerprint or a facial recognition or something as a third layer.
And a lot of phones, naturally, to reach the application you use as a second factor in your scenario, would require something like facial recognition or a thumbprint or something similar in order to break in. So naturally, a phone has an advantage in that respect. Less apples, of course, as per your example.
There's nothing wrong with Mac devices.
Absolutely not. I agree.
Right, patching. So I keep being told I've got to patch. What the hell is a patch, Barry?
A patching is when you buy a piece of software to fulfill a function. We mentioned some financial software, for example, today. Then naturally there are going to be things which are exploitable, which are identified after the fact. So, for example, if we download an email tool, or we download just about anything really, we've got a piece of software which is a point in time. A patch is put on top of an identified problem in that software, so to make sure it's not exploited by those who are seeking to sort of do us harm. So having patches in place, and we've all encountered them, whether we like to or not. We've all used, hopefully, a laptop, and most of us just click on the I'll do it later forever, when it wants to update what's happening to Windows, which in itself is a piece of software. And what it's trying to do is implement a patch to put literally, as it sounds, a layer of something over an identified problem so that you're not exploitable. So as much as it is an inconvenience, I will do it later, we'll do it later. It's actually really important to undertake that kind of patch. That's the most common example, I think, the most basic IT user might encounter, and that goes right the way through to the more advanced sort of situation where there's a whole series of software and platforms and applications. Yeah, you can have me for platforms and applications in use, where you need a patch management program, which means basically that you understand when you're going to be undertaking a bit of work on the software in place, so that you know that your customers are aware. We've all been told when we're using a banking app, for example, it's not working right now, you can come back in a few hours or whatever it's going to be. That's because they're undertaking patchware and security vulnerability reviews on that particular piece of software. So patching, yeah, there you go. It is as it sounds, and a necessary evil to have to go through.
Right. Can I just add something to that as well?
Yeah,
that I see quite a lot. Oh, sorry, Barry, you still talking?
No, go ahead.
one thing that I see quite a lot when going into smaller businesses is very old kit, and it's a real bugbear because obviously, you know, IT equipment is expensive, and you obviously want to get your money's worth out of that piece of kit. But when a device gets to a certain age, the hardware, the bits of physical infrastructure that make up that device can no longer be supported by some of the newer jargon operating systems. Windows, Apple Macintosh, Unix, those are all the kind of operating systems, typically Windows for user environments, cannot support those any longer, or running that newer operating system, that newer version of Windows, when it's been, you know, patched and patched and patched as well, cannot run very efficiently on that older piece of hardware. And one of the things I see a lot when I first go in and talk to a business about what's working well and what isn't, is you get people complaining that it's taking 15-20 minutes for them to log on because the hardware is just not up to the job anymore. So it's just one thing to bear in mind for keeping your IT environment healthy. You do need to consider having built into your budget a kind of rolling replacement of your IT equipment.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we've covered some of the hardware, we've covered some of the software, we've covered patching. Mandy, what's this malware nonsense I've got to worry about now as well? What's that about? What's that?
Well, unfortunately, there's some very nasty people around, and very clever nasty people, very highly, well, I say trained, but people would normally train themselves on how to write nasty code. So programmers which will write nasty code that, if they can get it onto your machine, will do all sorts of things that you really don't want them to do, ranging from just trying to get you to buy a little product, right up to trying to get you to buy your entire data, because they've taken all of your files, encrypted them, which means jumbled them up so that you couldn't possibly see them unless you had a magic key to undo it. So there's all sorts of nasty things that can happen, but the good news is that the vast majority of that is avoidable by having anti-malware software on your kit. And we don't need to go into details of the individual products, but Windows, for instance, comes with Windows Defender automatically. So if you buy nothing else, make sure that you've got everything switched on that comes with your machine. So that'll give you a level of protection, which is a base level, but still a good level of protection.
So okay, so I kind of understand that malware Defender will stop some of the malicious code. Is there anything I need to do, like keep that up to date as well? So I've got to keep all my software up to date, I've got to keep my hardware up to date. What else do I need to keep up to date? This is already beginning to sound a bit complicated, but I'm busy keeping stuff up to date.
Yeah, all of your all of the anti-malware has got to be up to date and from reputable suppliers. That's a whole new question in terms of how do you know what's reputable. We could spend hours on that, but for instance, if the Microsoft software, if you're getting messages on your computer saying this is out of date or you need to update something, then you've got to update it. And if you've got to reboot your machine, you've got to do it. It's all very well putting it off because you're busy. It's got to be done, because the anti-malware will work in conjunction with the patches that Barry was talking about, and you can't have one without the other. So you can have the best anti-malware, but if you haven't restarted your computer to allow the patches to get properly installed, then you're leaving yourself vulnerable. So everything works all together.
Yeah, the malware is naturally, and the people who write malware naturally evolve the way they do attacks in order to beat the defenses which are put in place by people like us. So it's important that when we identify how they're doing that, we patch our antivirus, etc., to make sure that we're ready for that constantly evolving threat. So yeah, patching, really, really important thing, really important takeaway. Yeah, don't just click later. Please do it now.
Because it always pops up, doesn't it, at the most inopportune moment. You're going to do a presentation or you're just going into a meeting and suddenly you get this, you've got to apply your patches now message.
Yeah, exactly. But you just make time for it, make it a thing that you do, definitely.
So I've got a virtual private network, I've got a firewall, I've got some anti-malicious software stuff, I'm patching. So why do I need to worry about passwords as well? Why, if I've got all this other strong stuff that's around me, why do I need to worry about passwords? And what's this about having strong passwords and 3 random words and password managers? How does all that work, Caro?
So the importance of passwords is basically to protect your stuff, and using password as a password is a very bad idea. So these people that Barry was referring to are incredibly intelligent people who are trying to make money out of buying data, or trying to sell you back your own data, or getting access to your data to do something. So you need to ensure that you're protected as much as possible. And one of the things that these types of people use is password crackers, which is basically software that runs to just keep trying and trying and trying, running through like different combinations of words, characters to try and crack your password. So the more complicated it is, the better. I think there has been a change in advice about passwords in recent years. Old advice used to be that you'd make your password slightly complicated, and there's rules around having uppercase letters and non-letter characters and numbers in there, but that you change it every 90 days. Advice has actually changed on this now, and the main reason for this is because if you're changing your password every 90 days, the likelihood is that you're going to forget that password and write it down somewhere. Yes, so again, the number of offices I've been into where there's post-it notes stuck on the side of the wall.
Yeah.
So so the advice now is make it a lot longer, as long as you like, and something that only you can remember, but it hasn't got password in it, it hasn't got anything to do with your name in it. One other thing that happens quite a lot now, I've seen on social media, people asking these questions about, oh, what's your favorite, what's your first pet called, or answer these questions about. All it is people trying to farm your data, so don't answer them. I know it sounds like a cute little quiz to, oh, my first pet was this, but don't answer them, because it's people actually trying to farm your data so that they can, my cat's called Humphrey. I don't use Humphrey in any of my passwords, but it'd be a good one, but someone else could use it, but yeah, I wouldn't. So that's the reason for this. Now, IT departments have an awful lot of passwords that they have to remember, because they will have the administration accounts, which means the back-end accounts, which allow them to do more stuff than just the user account, for all of the business applications, and for getting onto the network, and all of the kind of control of the IT environment. They have lots of passwords. So there is software available to enable teams of people to securely store these passwords and be able to share them as a team, so that, again, they're not stored in an Excel spreadsheet that could be found on a network that anyone can just access. So again, it's just everything. I know it sounds like we're being really over the top about security, but it's really important.
Yes, it does sound a bit scary, doesn't it? So I'm going to pull you off on two follow-on questions there, and I'm going to ask one to Mandy and one to Barry. So Mandy, okay, I've now got this really, really long password, but hold on a minute, I've got my email, I've got my accounting package, I've got my CRM system. How the hell am I going to manage all these really, really long passwords, because I have the memory of an ant? What's the best way of managing really long passwords?
Well, good news is that you don't have to. If you use a password manager, then you've got one password to get into what we could call it a gateway, which will enable the password manager to keep all of your passwords and use the right one in the right place at the right time. Password managers, I'm aware of the time, so I won't go into detail about it, but password manager.
Brilliant. Right, fantastic. I'm obviously asking the panel lots and lots of questions here. If anybody's got any questions, then please let me know. I recognise we're at the bottom of the hour, but I'm going to ask Barry one more question. Admin ID. Caro mentioned about admin IDs. Why can't I have admin rights and privileges on my machine? Why have I got to give it to somebody else?
Well, quite simply,
be careful how you answer this, by the way.
Okay, there needs to be a point of control over which a trusted entity who's deemed competent to undertake this role can control the manner in which password management occurs in a particular organization, function, or process. If an admin ID can retrospectively change or go in and interact with the tools at his disposal, or their disposal, should I say, in order to set what the password should be, or unpick sticky situations where passwords are lost or assets are in the wind and we can't retrieve, then if somebody's got an administrative function, quite simply, they've got a whole picture of what password management should look like in terms of the structure, and then control over a troubleshooting mandate in their toolkit. So yeah, not everybody can do that or should do that, because if everybody can see what everybody else is doing, then nobody's secure, really, are they? So it's important to have a structure in that respect.
Brilliant, brilliant. We have, it's amazing, isn't it, how quickly 30 minutes goes. Thank you ever so much to Caro for joining us at short notice with the session. Barry, Mandy, I know we're catching up later on as well. Barry, we've also got the 27001 session. As mentioned, this session is being recorded. We'll put a post out as well on LinkedIn. I think the team did amazingly well at not talking any jargon, so I'm pretty confident that the pot of money is there, pretty much untouched. And we'll put a message out on LinkedIn later about how much money about the donation we'll make across to Molly Ollie's as well. So thank you guys very much for joining, and we'll see you later. Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thanks very much.
Bye.
Bye.